Hi, Satyam.
Hello. Hi.
So, Satyam, I'm really excited to have you share your story of applying to so many top universities internationally and getting those solid admits as well. So, before we dive straight into, where you got in and other things, let's always start with an introduction, who you are, what's your background, what's been your academic and professional journey.
Sure. I'm Satyam. Talking about my life, I've grown up in different parts of India. We moved around a lot for my father's job. Uh, so that has given me a perspective in that sense. Interacting with different cultures, so to say. I did my bachelor's in computer science. It is from Manipal Institute of Technology, and I've been working in a tech startup called Comprise, which works in the unstructured data management domain for the past 3.5, now 4 years. Right. So the decision to do an MBA was kind of a spur of the moment. I was honestly confused between whether to do an MS or an MBA, and I felt like with the years of experience that I had, and I wanted to move more towards a strategic role, and that's why an MBA was what I was leaning towards. In fact, I had only given a GRE before this. I did not even think about giving a GMAT, and it worked out in my favor because I got to know that GRE scores are applicable for the top MBA schools as well. So I already had a GRE score. And I was not sure if that's the best score, and that's when I got into conversations with Rajiv. Um, he was already working with my brother-in-law who was also applying for an MBA. So he referred me to Rajiv, and he was having a good experience with him. So I just got on a call with him, and he told me that I can, with the score that I have, I don't think I need to wait another year. So that kind of fast-tracked my process, and that's how
Okay.
I got into this whole process. So yeah,
So, what was the score? That is something that is definitely
yeah.
something we would like to
Mm.
know.
The score was a 329, 161 in verbal, and a 168 in quant.
Okay.
And I had given it with an MS in mind. So I was thinking that, and I checked the average scores for top MBA schools. It did qualify, but I was still worried because the people that I had spoken to, they had 330 plus in most cases. So I was a little worried, especially given that my profile was slightly overrepresented in that sense.
Mhm.
Indian tech, IT engineer. So that sense, yeah,
Yeah, 3.5 years, right? 3.5 years of
yes,
experience is slightly on the shorter side for
yes.
gem applicants, but the score was definitely a positive that you already had on in your corner. What were the other concerns that you had, right? Like when you're looking at these programs, you said you're looking at MS versus an MBA. What specific elements that were you concerned about when you start thinking about the MBA? Which schools will I apply to? Which geographies will I apply to? You said you had a brother-in-law who had already recommended you to Rajiv. What was that first conversation with him like?
So I think, initially when I was deciding between the MS and MBA, and one major factor that came into play was the cost, right? Uh, Especially because I wanted to work in the US and with the international market in the condition that it currently is I was a little skeptical about whether MBA would be the right ROI or not. And in fact, I was considering Europe as a place to go for an MBA. And the first conversation with Rajiv was also, one, it was about whether now is the right time to apply with the score that I have, with the experience that I have. And the other one was, where should I apply? Whether it should be US centric or would it be good to have Europe in the mix? And he was very upfront about it. He said that US is where you get the best education, so you should definitely apply for it. And now is as good a time as a 1 year down the line. So you should be able to apply now. And in fact, it was a very positive conversation in that sense. So the reason I applied this year was that 20-minute or 25-minute
So
conversation that I
that
had with
encouragement that
Rajiv.
you got there gave you that boost, saying like, there's
Yes.
no harm in
Yep.
taking my shot this year itself. Awesome.
Yeah.
So now that you decided to work with us, what was the initial few meetings all about, right? Like we do this whole story pooling. Did you
Yeah.
feel that you have enough stories? We identify recommenders. You've been with the same company for a long enough time. These are again common challenges, right? Like some people feel like, I don't know whether my story is really that strong. I don't know whether my experiences are that rich. What am I supposed to kind of talk about in my application? Did you have those kind of worries or did you have very unique experiences that you felt like, I was very sorted and I knew what I would like to share?
Yeah. The first official, like session Rajiv and I had was about me talking about my story with my professional journey, my academic journey, and it was like a 30 to 45-minute monologue that I had. And as I was going through the conversation, I realized that it was very unstructured, much like the conversations I feel my answers today also. But so the first task that I was asked to do was to come up with like 4 or 5 stories in the STARL format, which is situation, task, action, result, and learning. And he asked me to categorize, and he had a template that he shared with me, and I was asked to. So when I got started with it, I was really worried because I felt like I did not really have a lot of experience. I had 3.5 years, and the person, my brother-in-law, who was my reference, he had like 10 years of experience. So I took his stories, and I saw that he had so many, and I did not really have many to share. But eventually, when you start thinking about it, when you sit down with it, I think you do end up understanding that, okay, you have done some impactful work, and it's all about building a narrative out of it. So, yeah.
Okay, so you now decided that you had some stories that you could share. When it came to taking those stories and looking at your school's list and seeing the kind of essays that they wanted, tell me what was those conversations like with Rajiv, right? Like when you spoke to him, what elements did he really help you refine? What elements did he kind of polish with you? What are the areas that you felt, that his inputs definitely solidified your application to some of the programs?
So let me preface this by saying that I did not actually have a lot of context for the whole MBA journey, right? So I had not really done my research about schools, and so I just went to Rajiv and saying like, okay, what are the schools that I can apply to? And he gave me a laundry list of schools that these are tech schools. You should be able to apply to these. And then I went and did my own research. There were some schools that held some aspirational value. So I went back to him and I discussed with him. And he was, right in calling some schools as, these are super dream schools. So be realistic about what you're aiming. But he was never, he did not try to discourage me from applying to those. He said that, okay, you apply to whatever you think should work. And he would give me the right inputs as to, okay, this might be realistic. This might be a little too optimistic for you, but at the same time, he would point out how I could best, cater my story or tailor my story to the particular schools at hand. So,
Yeah. So now, again, he told you about these schools. Best to kind of reveal at this point which schools you applied to, which school did you
sure.
make it in, and of course, the scholarships that you got from some of them as well. So if you could just share that, so people understand the process. Also, if you had a round one, round two mix, talk about that as well.
Right. So, again, my entire MBA journey, like at least the application part, happened in like 3.5, 4 weeks. It was pretty delayed in that sense, but I was lucky to get through 6 applications, with the help of Rajiv, of course. The schools, there were, I think, 3 M7s, MIT, Booth, Kellogg, and 2 T15s, Ross and Darden, and one Tepper, which is just because it's a tech school. And I think MIT was a waitlist. Kellogg and Booth, I got admits. Booth with a scholarship for $70,000, and so that's around 50%, I think. And Booth is also a dual degree, so it's not just a two-year MBA. It's a 2-year MBA plus master's program in computer science. So it's an MS plus MBA dual degree in that sense. Ross, again, I got waitlisted, and Darden, I got an admit with a 90K scholarship. Tepper was a waitlist. So yeah, I think yeah, there was one more school, LBS. LBS was a reject. So unfortunately, LBS was a reject. Everything else was a waitlist or an admit. So yeah.
Okay, and you did not get a scholarship from Kellogg, even though you got the admit, they did not offer you a scholarship.
No, no, I did not.
Okay.
And
How
I
did you
did try to
feel? How did you
negotiate,
feel
but
about,
yeah.
like, the fact that in what order did these admits come out, and what did you feel when you got each of these admits? Like, some of these would have made you more happier than the others. Which one did you kind of really rejoice?
I think I was happiest about Booth for sure. One because of the scholarship, and it was also the last one to come out. So in that sense, the first one to come out was Darden, and I think no, the first one to come out was Ross, and I got waitlisted. It was very disappointing. And then Darden came out with a very initially I got a 40K scholarship from Darden. So for me in the list of schools, for me aspirational value wise, M7s were obviously at the highest level. And in that, I was hoping to get into MIT or Booth. MIT because it's more focused for tech, Booth because it had a dual degree that I had applied to, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and then Kellogg came out. Kellogg was, it was quite pleasant to see that, okay, I got an admit from 1N7. I was not very hopeful until that point. And then Booth came out, and Booth came out with a pretty significant scholarship as well, which was around 50% of the tuition fee. So, yeah, I think it was an upward slope in that sense. And
O-
Booth was, because it was a dual degree, I was most excited about it and happy to see that I got a scholarship there. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you're happy with the admits. Did you negotiate at the scholarship at Darden, though
Yes.
you got that? Okay, what happened
Yeah.
there?
So with Darden, they bumped up my scholarship by another 50,000. So initially I got a 40,000 and then it went up to 90,000.
So $90,000
And
at Darden, but because it was not on the top of your pecking order, and both was because of the dual degree, you of course
yeah,
guessing
also it's a
decided
20,000
that
difference. So yeah,
yeah, 20,000 difference was not the only factor. Of course, the ranking and the
yeah,
dual degree, right? Both of them were other core factors to
yes,
let go of that additional 20,000 at Darden at that
yeah.
point in time. Now, what about writing your essays specifically on the goals? How did you go about gaining the goal clarity that you wanted? Choosing these programs, what to write in these essays, and how did that goal clarity even help you during your interviews?
Right. So when I was writing the stories for the Startle method, the initial Excel that I had to fill out that Rajiv shared, I think at that point of time, I really had to, and he had also, given a disclaimer that while you're writing these stories, be mindful about what your goals are, and see if you can cater the stories to suit your goals. So, I got to think about the goals early on, and I kept them. I did not try to make them something that I did not want to do. I did not try to inflate them in any way. It was exactly what I wanted to do. In the long term, he was also very candid about the fact that it's okay if you're not very clear about what you want to do in the long term. You can keep it a little vague. Vague is not the right word, but you can keep it a little abstract in that sense. You don't have to get into specifics. But short-term goals, be very specific about them, and that's what I did. So my short-term goals were to become a technical product manager at a global enterprise company, and since it's very closely aligned to the role that I'm currently doing, that did not seem far-fetched. While my long-term goal was to start an entrepreneurship journey in the Indian healthcare space, which is pretty much detached from what I'm doing currently. So short-term goals, he asked me to keep them realistic, and that's what I did. Long-term goals, he asked me to have a path that leads to it, but it's okay if it's not very specific.
Okay. And when it came to the admits, right? Like, did you see more applicants with your age bracket, also getting in? What was your experience like? Like when you got your admit, you would have done some, research on who are the other people who made it in. What was their profile like? How did you stand against many of these other folks, right? Like, what did you think about where you were, where they were, and were they equally capable? Probably you felt like, you got in, you had a little bit of luck going with you as well. What was that feeling like?
So I had the opportunity to go for a few meetups after I got admitted. I went for club meetups, I went for booth meetups as well. Um, and I think I'm still pretty much on the younger side when it comes to the people who got admitted, and also on the receiving end of a higher amount of scholarship compared to a lot of people. So in that sense, I was pretty surprised because I know that a lot of people have big names associated with them on their resume at least, which I did not have going for me. I was working for a startup, which is not really a global name. So in that sense, I was quite surprised, and definitely there would be luck factor as well, and also the fact that I was from the gem category, so to say. I was pretty surprised to find out that there were not a lot of people from my category, but at the same time, I was able to make it in. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think that is the edge, right? Like for me, Satyam, what we try to embody as an organization is helping those people who are exactly in this doubt, right? Like whether I'm too young, whether I have the right score. A lot of our applicants, which you might have also heard from Rajiv as well, they are not people who are like, having everything, all the ducks in an order, right? And they're just kind of then aiming for these top schools. They definitely have something lacking. They are not coming, as you correctly said, not from a tier one uh, college, super like, IITs, or not from a tier one professional organization like a Google, Microsoft, Oracle, or something of that sort. They're not necessarily. You had the GRE going for you, which is very strong, but the right kind of experience. As you said, when you walked into the room with a lot of the Booth and Kellogg admits, a lot of them had more experience than you. And despite these two, three challenges that you highlighted, getting there, I think that is the real confidence booster for us, that we stand by the applicants to make sure that they get the best possible outcome from their journeys. So that kind of
Sure.
vindicates the whole initial discussion that you and Rajiv had, that yes, you're ready and your profile is ready and we feel we'll get you in, right? So that I think was important. So another question I have is that there would have been one moment in this entire journey over those crammed 4 weeks of applications and then the 4 5 weeks of interviews post that. One conversation that you think you remember, or you really felt like this was a very vital conversation that I would vividly recollect, and what was it about?
I think the first school that I wrote the essays, I formulated the essays for was Kellogg, and I submitted, and I thought I had done a pretty good job with them. And then Rajiv had a bunch of feedback, and he said that we need to be a lot more specific about the goals, and we would have to build a narrative. It cannot be, it has to stand out in that sense. And I feel when he pointed it out, that's like I built out a template that I then used for each school. And I think writing essays for the first school, the first one that you're writing, that's the most difficult part because that's when you're really bringing all the stories that you've written to form one cohesive narrative. So I think that is definitely, that feedback session was definitely essential for this whole process. So yeah,
Okay, all
and
right.
and I would say the first conversation that I have with her about applying this year, I think that
Yes.
in terms of, I'm glad that I did not wait another year, right?
Okay, super. Okay, awesome. So that conversation was crucial about getting started with the essays, and that got you, along with the fact that you got the confidence on the first call, but you got the real idea of what to write, and what a admissions team would look forward to in your essays and in your applications. That conversation was crucial to get you started off. Awesome. If there was, looking back at the whole journey, one piece of advice you would give other applicants, about working with a consultant, about working with LilacBuds specifically, or about just using help in order to get to their goals, what would that be?
I think in terms of getting help from consultants or specifically in this case LilacBuds, I would say being proactive goes a long way. Because I'm sure, like, we think that, okay, we have a consultant at hand, so, they'll be taking care of everything, which is, they're there to guide, they're not there to do your work. So you essentially need to put in the hours and you need to come up with your stories because at the end of the day, it's your story. They're there to refine what you've done and not really do your work for you. So you sort of do your homework and, get things sorted on your end. If you're quick, they'll be quick to respond and you'll be done with the process a lot earlier. And that gives you more time to polish it. So yeah, that is one. And I think for the MBA journey in general, I would say, usually when we think about this whole thing, it feels like, especially for someone who's been like an engineer and has been very objective about a lot of things, this feels like we're writing a lot of fluff. But in hindsight, when you look at it, it does make sense to, it feels like we're just bridging dots, but because we take a lot of decisions in spur of the like as spur of the moment, and then I think it's important that you build that narrative and you understand the significance of that of building that narrative. It's not fluff; it goes a long way.
Okay, so you learned how to communicate your strengths very clearly through this journey. It clearly seems that, rather than feeling that, hey, you know what, I'm not really sure whether this represents me. But going forward, of course, going into the MBS program, you're going to get far more polished on many of these aspects as you look forward into your future goals. I I feel that, for any applicant, one of the key things that matters post getting the admit is the fact that you need to continue networking. If you want to get to a goal, it doesn't end with an admit, it just starts with an admit. The admit has
Right.
given you a platform now to connect with so many more people who are in the kind of roles that you aspire to be a part of, right? And if you, or even your long term goals in healthcare, and you start building those connections right now, you start talking to these people to understand what the industry is looking for. And that is like the next chapter that unravels after these admits overall, right? So, Satyam, one,
Right.
I would definitely advise, like, look forward to getting into more conversations, into more private chats or group chats with people from different communities. Keep yourself very open minded. I think that's another thing an MBA program is all about. Like, don't close yourself to like, hey, this is my group of 10 friends and I'm going to kind of hang around with them. Booth and Kellogg and Darden and all have large communities of students, 300, 400 students each minimum, even more in some of the schools. You want to make sure that you kind of draw energy from more than just 10 people, but maybe 40,
Sure.
50
Yeah.
people if you could interact with that many and work with them. By the way, what clubs did you talk about, or what kind of clubs got you really excited in terms of the applications? You must have got this question in a few places. How would you contribute to the classroom in your target schools? What did you write there?
So, I built in, like, again, there's nothing that you need to show that you can do, that you're not confident that you can do, right? Like, you don't have to add fluff there in that sense. Uh, I just built upon whatever my professional journey has been, whatever my strengths have been, and that is what I communicated as things that I would be able to contribute about. So I worked in a startup. I worked with, I've gotten the chance to interact with a lot of customers and global teams in that sense, because at a startup you probably uh, like, there's not a lot of vertical hierarchy. So I think that's what I built upon. That I have dealt with how data in the real world, and that's something that I can contribute to the tech clubs, for example, or that I've lived across different cultures in India, so I bring that kind of diversity of opinions to the classroom. I've seen how trust builds across different cultures, how businesses interact differently in different cultures. So that's something that I can bring to the classroom discussions at least. Yeah,
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Satyam. I mean, we wish you the best, and for your new start at Booth, we'll be, of course, following your journey. There will be future applicants who might connect with you and contact you to,
appreciate
hear more perspectives on what life is on campus, and of course, stay in touch and love to, hear back real stories from the campus as well.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.